Good morning. My name is Christopher Worth and I come from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Hearing your various transport issues this morning was interesting. I'm sort of recovering from 40 hours on the road since your last Friday, basically. I'm sorry. I do my doctorate part-time, and I also work as a senior policy advisor for housing for the New Zealand government. And my research has two empirical phases. Research has two empirical phases and is to do with urban regeneration, and this presentation is about the first of those empirical stages. Urban regeneration policy, and I emphasise the word policy, is at the focus of my research. It is that which is wanted to be achieved by those instituting these program interventions, and the degree to which they have been successful or otherwise, and the role and contextual elements that play out in this. Generally, it is the classic what works for whom and what circumstances. Specifically, I am seeking to develop a menu of policy choices suitable for urban regeneration in New Zealand by drawing on the experiences of countries that have an extensive practical history of undertaking urban regeneration as a policy response to the perceived problems of the urban domain, which in itself is not an uncontested question. It is the response to the opportunities and challenges presented by the interplay between systems and processes in the urban situation, those systems and processes that drive economic, social, physical and environmental transition from degeneration to regeneration, revitalisation, renewal, and in some people's minds, renaissance. Urban regeneration by its very nature is an interventionist activity. It's a complex social intervention in a very complex social, economic, physical and environmental context. As noted by Greenhalgh et al., social interventions are theories let loose in the real world, or theories incarnate. What I termed, capture Roberts' distinction, theories in practice. Theories in practice that may or may not play out successfully in any particular context. Although new to New Zealand, and just thinking here, New Zealand's got a whole fantastic 140 years of history, urban regeneration internationally has been a long-standing policy intervention. It provides the practical, concrete exemplars of regeneration activity, the who, the where, the when, the how, and the what of the activity. However, from the perspective of theory, the literature is deeply polarised, making it difficult to identify usable program theory. Polarisation is roughly along the lines of done to and done for, or top-down imposition, or bottom-up co-production. This raises questions as to whether urban regeneration has always been an activity that has resulted in positive change for all. It is a question of betterment and success, with the theories and practice the normative question of why and to what ends remaining unclear to policymakers. To this end, I am seeking to explicate the what works for whom in what circumstances to achieve effective policy transfer back to New Zealand. For the first stage of my research, I wished to gain an understanding of the theories in the minds of policymakers that underpin the approach to regeneration activity in New Zealand. As it was the perspective of policymakers instituting the interventions that I was interested in, I chose to use a Delphi process to elicit a consensus. The question that I asked the panellists in the Delphi process are outlined on the slide and focus on the issues to be addressed, the context, the outcomes sought, and the indicators of success. Why Delphi? Well, Lindstone and Turoff described Delphi as a method of structuring a group communication process so that the process is effective in allowing a group of individuals as a whole to deal with a complex problem. Developed by the Rand Corporation in the 1940s, it variously presented as a survey, a procedure, a method, and a technique, and is often colloquially called a conversation to capture the character of the interactions. The classical Delphi, the variation I used, has a series of rounds, usually 2 or 3, of questionnaire surveys, with the final round usually a ranking or prefacing exercise. Information and results are collected, analysed, and then fed back to the panel members between each round. One of the Delphi strengths is that in facilitating anonymity in this process, it encourages a richness and depth of response. It is ideal for gaining insights into people's thinking. By process, 2 rounds of questionnaires were sent out, the first seeking responses to 4 questions provided in free text by the panellists. The second, a ranking exercise on the results of the first round to achieve a consensus. Responses from round 1 were collected and coded for themes, with a total of just under 1,000 coding points across the 4 questions identified. Themes were then aggregated up to commonality. Question 1 providing 23 aggregated theme statements, question 2 35, question 3 27 and question 4 29. For each question the aggregated theme statements were then randomly listed on 4 further questionnaires and sent to the panellists for ranking, with panellists to identify the top 10 ranked statements for each question. This slide shows in full the ranking results of the first question as an example. The following slide shows the consensus results for the top 10 for each question scored by the panellists. It was notable that for each question all the top 10 scored 40 points or more, meaning that at least 4 people ranked them as number 1. There was a consistency of theme across the 4 questions, although the same theme did not necessarily rank equivalently across the 4 questions. The results gave a clear indication of the basis of the experts panel's thinking on urban regeneration policy as applied in the New Zealand context. In situating the results then into program theory, as noted earlier, the literature presented historic approaches as polarised in their fundamental foundation theories, along a continuum between top-down, market-led approaches and bottom-up co-production. Issues raised through the debates in the literature suggested that urban regeneration was just as likely to lead to disjointed implementation, decanted communities, alienation, growing social exclusion, with the benefits going to those external to the area subject to change, as it was to be a useful, sustainable and equitable urban change for those within the communities. As noted on slide 4, historically action was invariably to a greater or lesser extent sought to achieve reconciliations between the opposites of enterprise and community, efficiency and welfare, and economic means and local ends. More recent approaches over the last 15 years or so have attempted to reconcile these tensions by implementing less starkly opposed approaches, aiming to take the best from both ends of the spectrum. What are policymakers in New Zealand therefore relying on when looking to implement urban regeneration? This slide and the next show the collective consensus from the 4 questions mapped against the emerging theory in the urban regeneration. There appears to be a reasonable alignment between how New Zealand policymakers are envisaging the urban issues, current context, policy objectives and indicators of success, and in recent thinking as represented by the emerging program theory. If what policymakers are relying on is consistent with the emerging theory in the literature, it is also potentially then consistent with the current theories and practice being implemented in international exemplar cases. The Delphi process has provided me the program theory to investigate in these exemplar cases. I will be looking to see how these theories of practice are actually playing out. Are the mechanisms within the program theories firing as expected, and what is the impact of the various contexts on the mechanisms and on the success of the theories and practice let loose upon the world? What can New Zealand learn from these real-world examples? The second phase of my research will therefore look at these theories and practice as they have been implemented and draw conclusions on their effectiveness within different contexts. And for a short comment on Delphi and the realist inquiry. Delphi is complementary to realist inquiry in that it can allow you to begin opening the black boxes as to why interventions work. I used it to gain an understanding of an initial program theory that is being relied on by policymakers to test against the formal theory espoused by the literature and to provide insights for investigation of my exemplar cases. As Jeff Wong recently asked in a Ramesses conversation, what is the ultimate point of what we are trying to do? What is the program theory being relied on? Knowing this provides entree to the asking what it does and where and for whom it was successful or otherwise. Delphi can be a useful tool for beginning to open these black boxes.